if we go back, like, tell us everything we need to know about Ian from, what made you who you are now.
I've lived in like 5 different states, right? So I'm not the kind of person that like plants really, really deep roots anywhere. We moved from Los Angeles to Kansas when I was 10. So that was like a huge, huge culture shift, really. And I stayed in the Midwest up until like 4 years ago. And so now I'm on the West Coast now. So I would say like part of that was kind of crucial to me maintaining long distance relationships. Like I have friends that I've had for decades from different states. Also helped me to like, I have a certain set of political views that are opposite of a lot of the people that I grew up with in Kansas, especially. And so it also like I feel comfortable even in a situation where I may not like necessarily share the same values as someone else. And so I think like, having that open heart, open mind kind of mentality is something that just comes naturally to me.
Just to start off with, in terms of what confidence means to you.
Confidence is self-trust, and it's self-love. It's more importantly, it's like it's working on those things. I think confidence is something that's actually in movement. It's not stationary, right? It's something that can fluctuate. And it can fluctuate because there's so many external factors in our lives that can impact how confident we are, right? Like on a scale, like I mentioned that scale, like 1 to 10, like some days you're at a 1 and some days you're at a 10. And hopefully, you spend most of your days at a 7 or 8, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There was something else that you mentioned around, if you don't mind me sort of repeating, you mentioned a company you worked for that shut down, and that was a particularly notable period that was really, really tough. And you mentioned it was really, really hard to maintain your confidence throughout that period. And just using that as a very specific example, what are sorts of strategies to deploy during that period, if you can remember, or whatever you can remember, that really helped you pull through?
So I was in this seemingly comfortable space, but reminder, money doesn't buy happiness, like it doesn't buy confidence. It doesn't, it doesn't actually make things easier except to keep the lights on, and to feed yourself, right? So I ended up getting a life coach during that time, which helped immensely, right? So like it really, and a career coach. I ended up having two separate resources, and that's really what, and definitely coming from a place of privilege, right? I had the money to be able to afford those things, but because I took the leap, and I'd never had a career coach, I'd never had a life coach, I took the leap and got those resources for myself. That helped immensely. But every single day, I really just had to say, get up and go do it. I would love it if it were more complicated than that, or if it was, simpler, complicated or more simple, if there was a method, or just, I didn't have to do that. But literally, I just had to get up and I had to remind myself, you are qualified to apply for these jobs, even though you're being rejected. You are qualified, and the type of person who should work at these companies, even if the interviews don't go well. It was so rough, and I wish that there was a method, but it was just get up and do it.
And like, would you say you are a confident person, and would you be a confident person even without your job?
I honestly couldn't tell you. If I lost my job tomorrow, I don't know if that would, how big of an effect that would have. I do like to think that the pandemic forced a lot of us into recognizing that we are not our jobs, right? Because our homes became our jobs, everything became like revolved around the time spent. And then we suddenly realized that the time spent was time wasted, right? We can still do our jobs and have confidence in them, and also really focus on the things that bring us joy. Talking that out loud, I do think that I would maintain some level of confidence, right? Those external factors would definitely impact things in the short term, but as I said before, like, everything is temporary, everything changes.
Where do you see your own journey with confidence building going? Like, based on everything you've been through and where you've gotten to, where do you see, the journey continuing for yourself?
I definitely see it coming into play more so in my personal life, right? After the pandemic. I mean, one of the biggest things that I did right after the pandemic is I went to Puerto Vallarta for a month by myself. I had never
Wow.
traveled internationally by myself. And it was all over the place. Oh, there were some days I was full of tears, and then there were some days that I was just on the moon. But I came back and I was like, I am very, very ready to form more connections, to meet more interesting people, and that kind of stuff got a little stifled from my move to the Midwest to Portland. But again, like, I think it's the personal life, moving through the trauma of this worldwide health crisis, learning how to socialize again. Like, all of these things are requiring a lot of bounceability and are requiring a lot of confidence, that you may not necessarily believe in, but know that cultivating that is the right direction, and ultimately leads in the direction of a lot of joy.
I have one more question, which kind of builds on a similar question that I've already posed you ahead of time, but it's literally one theme, and that's probably unsurprising, but we're faced currently with that Gen Z young adults are the least confident generation. No matter what statistic you look at, they always come out pretty horrendous when it comes to mental health challenges and confidence. And, numbers that we generate through a service that we run is about 90% of young people struggle with their confidence. And so what advice would you give someone who is in that generation now, but also what advice, and maybe that's the same, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Definitely tell myself to be more intentional about social media, right? There have been a lot of studies that have shown that engaging in social media for extended periods of time actually trigger things in our brain that make us compare ourselves to other people, right? Yeah. There's also this idea of social media containing so many memories. Our brains are not actually built to contain as many memories as social media does, right? And being reminded of memories that maybe your brain hasn't retained can actually also increase anxiety, right? So I'm getting like really clinical, because at the end of the day, it's not about get off social media. It's not about like stop comparing yourself to others. Like, that is going to happen, and it's fine that happens, but be intentional about when and where and how you're using social media. So that's what I would have told myself if I had known any of that, had that information as Facebook was becoming a thing. I would just remind people, like, especially when you're younger, like, we were going through so much at that age. We don't really know ourselves until our 30s, in my opinion, in my experience. And so, think about confidence, think about self-talk. Don't expect yourself to master it. And I wish that I had told myself that. I wish I'd given myself space to just feel a little insecure, to the extent where I wasn't relying on others to, mitigate that insecurity. I wish I had been like, it's totally fine to feel this way.
Oh my God, brilliant. No, that was the end of my a series of questions. Was there anything that you felt like you really wanted to share about confidence, observations, or anything that I haven't asked?
Yeah, I think honestly, the most confident people I've encountered in my life have not needed to convince me that they're confident, right? The only person that they ever needed to convince was themselves.